Holy
The preachers would love.
oh, Lord.
Think about this preacher. They had a microphone on.
Yeah.
They had the remote on. He went to the bathroom and didn't
Oh.
pick it up.
So I had this idea years ago of having certainly a conversation with you. We always have really good, deep conversations, but in my mind, it was called A Conversation with My Dad. And it was about just the questions that I wanted to ask you. I'm obviously a licensed psychologist, and so I sit with people who talk about just the impact of growing up in a certain environment. And they don't often have the opportunity to go back and have conversations or ask questions, or even to say the things, right, that they want to say to someone while they're still alive. So the conversation for me has evolved into this idea of really talking with the folks who have had an impact on me in ways that have transformed me. And I call it flowers. So the opportunity for me to give flowers to the people that I love who've had an impact, and to share with them what that impact has been, what those core memories are, and also to dig a little bit deeper. I feel like as Black folks in particular, we don't often have the conversations that are necessary and get answers to some of the questions that may bring insights and awareness that we otherwise wouldn't have, and then end up living with that regret. So that's the idea. You're my first conversation. So it's a conversation with my dad. So I can give you your flowers, but also ask you some questions, some curiosities that I have. You ready?
I'm ready as I want to get.
Well, let me start with how are you feeling?
I'm feeling okay as an old person, and looking at the phases, reflecting on the phases of life. And, you know, jokingly, I was wondering, did you all get the message of get ready to check out or something? You know, and no, I feel okay. I feel good. I'm very blessed and happy when I get an opportunity to be around my family, you, my baby girl, my shining star. You always amaze me. I mean, each time I'm in your company, I learn something new about you, or see something new that you're doing that I'm always wondering about what my children are doing, how they're doing. So to see you showed me some of the background, some of the behind the scenes stuff that you use to do what you do. And it's fascinating.
Can we start with Black boyhood for you and what it was like growing up?
Oh.
I'm curious. I know that part of what you shared with me over time is like you did not know your biological father. And so I'm curious about that experience and what it was like. I know that there were other men, right, in your life at some point with your mom, but I'm just curious what it was like for you.
Well, it did center around my mother being the key person in my life, because my father was not always there. I think I was around 9 the last time I actually had physical interaction with him. I do have memories of earlier when he was a cooker. So I can remember him cooking, and one of the things that he cooked was liver, and they'd have to force me to eat that. I just didn't like liver at that time, but I can remember him. It's more about, just little flashes of times when I saw him interacting with friends, that he would have friends to come over and sit out in the yard, and, they'd have their little wine they'd be drinking and talking or playing chess or whatever, checkers. So I have those moments. I have brief moments of remembering when we were at the little hot dog stands. Back when I was coming up, they had the little wagons on the street, like when you see parades in the bar, and the people are there vendors. And they're selling, they used to sell hot dogs on the street like that. And I can remember eating hot dogs with them. I loved hot dogs with onions on them. I don't dare touch onions now, but back then. So there are those little fleeting moments that I have of him. And, and just more memories of what folks have told me about him, his mannerisms, whatever. I've found out where he was buried, as you know, and I was, about 77 then? 77 or so when I found out where he was buried. I thought he was dead. He had died many, many years ago, back around in the 70s. And I found out that he died in 1996. So he was still living. He was living as I was going through the heights of my professional career. So now I wonder if he saw any of that, if he knew any of that, because he lived in Hartford for many years. So I've found out after the fact many things about him that I didn't know firsthand.
What was the impact of his absence?
I guess missing the father's counsel, the father's taking you to ball games or watching you or helping you with sports and those kind of things. So I didn't have those kind of opportunities. I understand he was a dancer, he and my mother. I didn't learn how to dance until I was maybe in junior high school, and I wasn't much of a dancer then. I flailed my arms and things, so folks got back out of the way. The things that father would do, I think more the counsel. As over the years, I've met men folk that had kind of mentored me or took me under their arm. Deacon Kirlock was, of course, one that like a surrogate father, if you will, because he sat and gave me the adult counsel that helped me stabilize myself and raise my family.
Before you go there, though, I do want to go back, because I do remember a couple of years ago, you were visiting me here in Georgia.
Right.
And I know that I've just watched you over the years be interested in like genealogy and again, the narrative of your father and where he is or was, as well as other relatives. But I remember the moment of you coming back and finding out that where he had been buried, and that it wasn't as long ago as you thought. And seeing you break down in that moment, and then me as your daughter holding you as you sobbed, was impactful. Is not sufficient for me. I think, as much as I love you, what I felt was just the loss, like the loss, right? Like that you had been searching, and in that moment, that realization.
Some closure, if you will.
It was closure?
In the sense that he was buried in a cemetery in a churchyard, because I had the image of him being a drinking person. I know that he worked all the time. I do not know that he worked. He was a hustler in terms of working, and feeling some of the good truths that I had heard that I wasn't sure of because of the difficult or not so flattering truths that I had heard about him, or images that I held in my mind. And over the years, putting things together and finding that he had a pretty heavy struggle as a black man, as all of us do, continue to do. But that moment was precious for me. I will never forget your holding me as I sobbed. Couldn't help it. But it was in some ways a big release for me. Just being able to close the book and be satisfied with it, because I had heard that he had died back in the 70s. I had heard that somebody had harmed him. I didn't know. I know that the police used to be brutal to him on occasions. As they were to all black men, if they got you into custody, they would beat you up and then take you to the next town and let you go, call that station and let them know that you were there. And then they would pick you up and have their way with you. And sometimes black men didn't survive that. So I can remember one time seeing him bruised up, and I know it was the police that did it. Never talked about it, never said a word, but I knew that was the case.
You being 77, I think in that moment when I was holding you, it was just the idea that you, as a 77-year-old man, were still searching. That wound, that longing, really, was still there. And it made me think of all the children with that experience, that no matter how old you get, the desire for the connection to a parent doesn't go away.
And, and many of us have that kind of experience in our lives. You always see on the movies, you see fathers trying to reconnect with a son that the family that they had abandoned or left, and so on and so forth. So those kinds of issues are prominent in our culture back, I know, generationally for, folks during my period.
I certainly remember you started to talk about it. I wanted to go back to that moment because I do want to talk about then how you, as a boy,
Mm-hmm.
began to define your own masculinity in the absence of, right, your dad since you were 9 or 10 years old. And so you mentioned Mr. Kerlock, I remember, and other men. But can you take me on the journey of then how you began to think about yourself in terms of growing up to become a man? Like what informed that? Who informed that?
I guess I kind of worked through it, but in early life, with the single mom, she was able to find friendship in a church. And that church became my village or my extended family. Did have a cousin or two that was in there, but my exposure to men folk came from that environment. Men folk that were deacons and so on and so forth, helpers in the church, keeping the church going, and musicians. I find it interesting, my younger brother had a music talent, and we now talk a lot about that, and we reflect on some of those old folk there. But he had the musical talent. I've emerged as a deacon, which I didn't think would happen. Many of my memories and my stories in life as I interact with folks in my church reflect on those people that poured into me and our family, and that helped me to emerge as a young man that didn't want to stray too far out of the way because Sister So-and-so was looking, Mother Jones was looking, Brother Green was over there, would see me if I was skipping school. And back then, Black folks had to be a village for one another, support for one another. So if I did something wrong, one of them might correct me. I didn't want to get in that position. Those kinds of folks were pillars in my life and boundaries, if you will, but for the right kind of reason.
What did they teach you, particularly the men, about being a Black boy and even being a Black man?
It's all of that was observation. I can't remember. We would go to things like YMCA or to camps. Those were the things that I would go to, where I would interact with men or older men that would be there. I was just able to observe. I can't recall too many that talked or counseled. An example of that would be that I was not good at baseball. And one of the things that I now laugh at is whenever I would play in class, in school, and gym, when we played baseball, particularly, if I hit the ball, when I finished, I would sling the bat. I would just throw the bat back, and there were folks in line waiting for the bat, and other team members and stuff out there. And nobody told me anything about it. They didn't, they didn't teach me or tell me, look, you gotta, and I didn't pick up on that. I just get excited and I'd run because I hit the ball.
Yeah.
So learning the context of sport, football. My wife knows more about football.
Yes.
When we sit and watch football together, she's asking her about the rules and plays and stuff. So those things are kind of weak. They're not there for me because I didn't have the men folk to teach me those kind of things. Swimming, never learned to swim. I went to camp and we had a counselor, but never that individualized support and what have you, that to learn to swim. When my mother did marry and she had a stepfather, he couldn't swim. He would take us to the pond. He would throw us in the water over his head. He couldn't swim out, didn't get it. But he was trying to throw you out there.
Teach you how to survive.
Swim. Yeah, which was his way of thinking. But that hasn't left a good impression.
What's striking for me, though, is the idea that Black men were present, but your experience, right? The idea of teaching by way of talking, right? So like you said, you're picking up on it. And I say that because one of my favorite sayings is development does not drop out of the sky. Like this is my thing as a person who talks about parenting Black children in particular, because it's the idea that children are born into the world and somehow they just absorb, but the necessary piece of connecting and talking and teaching gets left out. And even as you think about the experience of Black folks, the narrative intergenerationally of like, you've got to survive and how that translates into like, here, I don't know how to do it, but I'm gonna throw you into the water, right? And you just go survive out of necessity, and how powerful and maybe necessary that was, but just how that gets transmitted intergenerationally for me. Even if I think about my son, right, your grandson, and trying to unlearn is what I say, some of those patterns, trying to understand where that comes from so that we can unlearn some of that because of the impact. But that's, that's what, as you tell that story, I'm just like, they were around, but you, like the lack of connection and talking.
In talking with them, right, I got that more from the females. The women that nurtured me while my mother was in church doing the secretary work or playing the piano or in the choir. The ladies that quietly sat me up under their arm and hugged me when the church got loud and I was afraid. They gave me a little piece of peppermint candy that taught me love that way. There was a couple, they were older ladies, and one would have me go with her. She would go fishing down around Watershop Pond, and she would have me to go with her and maybe dig bait. And she'd give me a nickel or so. You know, back then a nickel was a big thing. But she, that, and, and she just kind of, I'd spent time with her. So there were some older women that I spent time with while my mother was working or whatever. But, and they might have been babysitting. I don't know whether they were babysitting or they just took me for the day and took me out. But that's where the nurturing and the love, from those kind of memories around the church. In the church, the young guys, we were little bad little fellas, and the sisters would be making ice cream and sweet potato pies to sell. And they would have us, we'd be trying to hang around to get a pie or some of the ice cream. But they would have us, the old time, they would churn the ice cream with the hand crank. And they would get us to do that. They might give us a nickel or something to do that, but we'd be waiting to get the little thing inside the ice cream thing. We would get that and clean that off, much like you do getting batter off of a cake spoon. So that would be a treat for us. But those kind of little things that they did. And then they would teach us in those moments. They would talk to us and teach us in those moments, teach us behavioral things, respectful things, that we needed. So they were pouring into us in those ways, and that's where I got a lot of my nurturing. I got male nurturing and teaching care probably some of it came through school, high school. Some of my high school teachers
you
took
have
a
black
liking
male
to
teachers?
me.
You have black male teachers?
No, I didn't have a black teacher until I was in college. A black male teacher. We put it that way. Until I was in college, I had black teachers in elementary school that were nurturing as well. So a lot of my nurturing came from the women in the shaping of my thoughts, my behaviors, the way I treat people. As I got older, there were teachers that would pour into me because they saw something in me. Yeah. I was a fairly intelligent kid, but I was full of energy. So to channel that energy into a learning they might tell little stories and put me and one of my friends to do little things where they would engage me while they were teaching and involve me in it. And after class or in the hall, we might stop me and talk to me and say a couple of little things that were encouraging.
They saw you.
Yes.
They interacted with you.
Right.
They connected with you.
Yeah.
How, in my experience working with folks who also have sort of a narrative where, a parent may not have been present, I feel like there's a crossroads, right? Either people kind of repeat that cycle and pattern and lack in their parenting and caretaking, or they do the opposite of what they experience. And my experience of you, for me, is that you've been a wonderful father. So I'm just curious about your narrative and as you became a father, what it meant for you in terms of defining the kind of father you wanted to be and becoming such a wonderful dad in the absence of having that model.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Well, some folks in life follow the role of the people that are most prominent in their lives, male or female, and they'll follow after them or they'll do the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think somewhere in there I saw the struggle of my parents and wanted to be a better parent. It all came through struggle, I think. Most of it came through struggle. So, and that's why I say Mr. Kirlock was one that stands out most for me. And I was in my late 20s and 30s when I really got to know him to work. And he began to teach me about the struggles of family,
Mm.
challenges of men, black men in particular, the everyday life struggles that you had, struggle to be able to have a family and to raise that family, how you present yourself, how you command respect in your work environment, so on and so forth, with your workers. He was one of the ones that truly poured that into me, man behavior. He was a religious man, but he talked about his boyhood, younger days when he was sowing his oats and the lessons that he poured into me. And I think that gave me a maturity that I had above some of my peers. It was helpful when I organized the vets group in my council with young veterans, with young families. It was helpful. That's where the solidness came from. Some of it came from the preachers. Those were the strongest black men in my life. The pastor that I had through the years, because I was in church at a very young age. Came into the church as a carrier, maybe been carried in this. I was always around the church environment. And those preachers and the deacons were probably the most visible example of black men in action for me. And they were teaching, the preachers would be teaching you about behaviors, good behaviors and faith and so on. The deacons modeled that in terms of the caretaking that they did, taking care of the families that needed transportation, needed food or whatever. So it was around me and I saw it, and I got a lot of my learning from just observations, not so much of sitting down and, well, son, right. I just didn't get a lot of that until I was, like, say, in my 30s, meaningfully. So there were opportunities that I really could have went wrong. I really could have went wrong.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your experience in war in the sense of being a veteran. How old were you when you were drafted to go to Vietnam?
I was 20.
What do you, I know that folks are drafted. I'm imagining you received a notification in the mail, but can you take me back to that moment in terms of finding out that you had been drafted?
Well, I was in high school. I had messed up in school, so I was kind of recovering and back in school. So I was in my senior year, close to graduation time, and I worked in a gas station. I was a mechanic. I went to high school for auto mechanics. I was a mechanic, and I was working in a gas station doing the mechanical stuff there. And my mother came in during the day, which was unusual, highly unusual for me. And she brought me a letter. And it was one of those famous greeting letters, the draft notice.
So she knew what it was?
She had read it, and so she immediately brought it to me. And so that was a punch in the stomach, to say the least.
What was the feeling? Can you recall?
Well,
what was the punch?
Well, it put a damper on any of my idealistic hopes of being a young man that was going to grab a motorcycle with another one of my high school friends and go across country and work across country. That was kind of the ideal dream that we had, going and stopping in little places and working, doing our mechanic stuff or whatever we needed to do to pay our way across, but to travel across the country. Just take like a bucket list trip. And we were just youngsters and I was approaching adulthood. That time was running out where you had to get serious. But we wanted to take that moment to kind of live that life, and all of that just got dampened.
So you knew in that moment life was about to change?
Yeah, because Vietnam was going on and the draft was real. And I was the first of the only of my immediate siblings to go in the military. My father wasn't in the military that I knew of, so the closest person I knew that had been in the military was a boyfriend of one of my cousins that was living with us. A young lady that was, my mother had brought from the South to give a better life, and he was in courtship, and he was a Korean veteran. One thing I could always remember is that he told me that about every 10 years or so there's a war and he predicted that I was going to be in a war. And so that kind of
Reality.
hit too, that reality hit. But it just meant that all my dreams were nailed down. I can't say that I was really fearful. I was more disappointed that life was going to take a serious turn. The other part of it was that, well, getting in there, I'd maybe have a meaningful job if I survived, and I'd be able to help my mom financially to get a house, with the finances, with her working with the other siblings. So that was the upside of going there. But it was tragic for all of us that I was going.
How did your mom react?
Well, she was fearful. I know a little heart was in her mouth, and she was fearful. I was surprised but when I first went in New Jersey, I was in the inducting place in New Jersey, first going in and getting your uniform, your haircuts, and getting your first orientation. And she made her way down there. I had a stepfather then, and they came down to see me there, and I was surprised because I know that any kind of going anywhere was a challenge. And so, she came down, and I still have the picture of her and I in a little picture booth that we took.
I've seen that.
I know she was afraid the whole time because of the war going on.
Did you know, when you were drafted, did you know folks who had died because the war was going on? Did you all know?
No, there were other guys in the neighborhood that had been like in the Korean War that talked about it. And, I know one of the guys had a gun. It always fascinated me that he had this beautiful chrome gun in 45. And I guess it was the war thing that had kind of led him to that, to have that. And he was a respected person in the community, neat dresser, guy that you looked up to. Had I known more or had somebody to tell me more, I probably could have wrangled around being an infantryman. That's the thought that I have. But when in hindsight, and after being in Veterans Affairs for as many years as I've been, and the commissions that I've been on, and the things that I've learned since then, we were targeted to go into Vietnam and be in that infantry. And when I say we, blacks and poor whites, we were targeted. There was a project called Project 100,000 that in October in 65, 66, 65, maybe 67, when they had the build up, they had Project 100,000 where they rounded up those. That was the target number of draftees that they were pulling in. And they were to, when President Johnson came in, he talked about, giving them a skill. Well, we'll get those poor, non-skilled blacks and whites, and we'll put them in, and when they come out, they'll have a skill and be able to go out and find a job.
That was the sales pitch.
That was the sales pitch. The reality was if we survived.
Right.
And interestingly enough, the job specialty that I ended up with would have qualified. I was qualified to be on a SWAT team when I came out. I could have applied for and met all the criteria for being on a SWAT team, which was sort of new then,
Right.
sort of newly developed. But they weren't having folk that looked like me on SWAT teams back then.
Gotcha. I'm treading lightly because I know in my lifetime I've watched, or I have memories of when I was younger. Yes, vet centers, you doing veterans advocacy, seeing veterans cry. So I'm treading lightly on the topic because I know it can open up a lot. But what I thought about the other day was the fact that you made it out alive, and that's why I'm here. It's war.
Yeah.
And it's so barbaric and inhumane. And you've shared as I got older, and I think, as I got older in my lifetime, there are like little glimpses that you would share that I know you kept under wraps, just the horrors of what you've seen, experienced. And it just, what sits in my belly is the idea that you made it out and I'm here. And so while I would never wish that on anybody or on you, that experience in coming out, then you meet mom and all but like I'm here. Not only am I here because you made it out alive, But even my career was influenced by watching you do work with veterans, which made me question, like, what does it mean to help people? So like a part of my core narrative of who I am is connected to this horrific experience that you had to endure. And I can't, it sort of sat with me in terms of reconciling that, because I would never wish that on anyone. You were talking about, and I was curious about how your mom reacted, because I have a son. And I feel like we're in a time right now where drafts and those kinds of conversations are coming. And I can't imagine getting that letter and having to bring that letter to my son. And yet also having the experience, like I said, of being very proud of you as a veteran, but like hearing those pieces to the point where I don't watch war movies. I, Miriam, don't watch war movies because I know or sensed, even as a young child, how painful those experiences were. I've watched, fireworks, and I'm very protective of that. And so I can't even. I remember when like Platoon and those movies were coming out, or like there's violence, even though I've never directly witnessed it, can't and will not watch it to this day.
I haven't seen it either. I'll be 80 years old in a couple of months.
So I'm treading lightly because I don't want to open up too much, but just wanted to, I'm curious about that experience.
Just have at it. It's therapeutic to talk about it, and it even answers questions for me. Things are still, there are things that still I'm processing, unfolding, looking at, re-examining in life, even this late in life.
Yeah.
Through the counseling experiences, through the counseling training, but more through the lived experience. There are many things that come out, and I try to use some of those lessons in my teaching when I would teach the men's classes and in Sunday school or what have you, and have those opportunities to talk. There would be life lessons that would come out of there. Because as terrible and as horrible as war is, it bursts a lot of things that are positive and progressive for the community. Whether you talk about the mechanics of life and the things the inventions that come out of that, or you're talking about the psychological impact and their work that unfolds in trying to bring healing to a resolution to some of the struggles that are going on, because out of that comes high suicide rates and broken families and marriages that don't last because of the trauma being too great in there. But out of there come strong teachers and engineers and pilots that are competent and caring about the folk that they're transporting across the nation. There are deep thinkers that come out of that are so, and people like you that come out of it, the little children that watch, kind of out of that form their little lives into careers and professions. And I've looked at you and observed that in you, and I'm very proud of who you've become and the work that you do. You're on the cutting edge of the psychological stuff.
A lot of the work that I do centers race and racism, and certainly the experience of Black folks. And I know that I got that from just growing up in community, and that being a very intentional conversation in our home, Blackness, but also watching you advocate not just for veterans, which you cared about, but Black veterans in particular. I am curious what you think is important for folks to know about Black veterans in particular, based on the work that you've done and the systems that you've been a part of.
That's an area that has been profoundly impacting for me, is the service of Black folk, period. The fact that they wore the uniform meant that they were purposefully and intentionally laying their lives on the line for this nation, a nation that has never fully embraced them, regardless of how much they've given, whether in uniform or out of uniform. But when the experiences of Black folks in uniform are really, it can be heartbreaking when you look at the responses that they got for the service that they gave.
Right.
And you can look at that even today. You look at the Black men and women, particularly the Black men, the generals and admirals that have been purged out of the military after giving 30, 35 years of service, fighting in multiple wars, the sacrifices that they made away from family, not the life-threatening things that they experience. But on top of all of those things that they do that goes along with a military experience, there's the racism part that so they would always be fighting two wars. We'd say they were fighting two wars. They'd be fighting the racism war and all of the inequities that go with that, with racism. And then the challenge of being respected and given an opportunity to bring what they have through the military experience and having that respected or appreciated. Sometimes it's respected, sometimes it's appreciated. But like I say, even today, you see at the highest levels of our government that they're pushing and eliminating folks that have given their life in service to this nation. And it's just, simply saying, it's just not right. It's ugly. It's really ugly. And folks need to look at that for a minute. They want to know, what do you guys want? What do you need extra? I go back to when we were defining the post-traumatic stress stuff. We were told that young black soldiers, post-traumatic stress wasn't as significant or as impactful on us because we came out of hard times. We always had hard times. So they put it as a sort of a social response to social behaviors. Our anger, our frustrations, our assertiveness was seen as just unruliness and anger at, I guess the things we're experiencing, just regular street life and life in general. And of course, some of that was there, but the impacts of war is much more profound, and it has a doubly impact on our families in terms of being able to raise the family and to even just live and feel like a normal person would feel, whatever that is, however you define that normalcy, at what level you define that. But being able to, it impacts your ability to express that love and care amongst your family. And that's at the very base level of life experience and wanting to have a life that has some meaning to you in terms of your family. I can remember going through the adjustment of coming home from work with all the stresses of work on me and having my young children come to meet me. I didn't have to, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
You all would have to look at my facial, you'd have to read my body language and my facial expression to know whether to come and greet me or to run. And that hurts even today. Did I put you there? Did you have to go through that? And that's just at that very basic family, growing a family level. Doesn't talk about the struggles with war, with work.
Right.
And if any of the other places that you might work, even your social community experiences, and I always refer to in the church, but those feelings come out and you can lose control or you not know how to manage them. But for me, over the years, the cost to my family, and when you multiply that by the thousands to millions of black folk that have been in those wartime experiences, being humiliated, Civil War, and I had the opportunity to help bury some Civil War soldiers that were found in South Carolina. And those were 17, 18-year-old men that gave their lives for this country and didn't have rights to go and sit down at a restaurant or even walk in the front door of a old country store. We had to get off the sidewalk if somebody white approached them. Just dignity pushed down into the ground. And those young men fought valiantly, gave their lives, running into the face of fire. And I'm talking about like Fort Sumter, and you all might know it as the story Glory.
Mm-hmm.
That's a true story of the Mass 54th and 55th units as they went into war and were even humiliated in burial as they were buried. So we had the opportunity to give back a dignified burial back in, what was it, 1980, 89, I think it was. Yeah, back in 1989, and I had the honor of being able to put Massachusetts state flag on 19 soldiers that were buried in a mass grave together. Oh. And it was the Black community that had saw to it that they were given that burial with dignity, with all the official accolades. Yeah. So Governor Dukakis was the governor then, and I was one of his deputies. And we went to Beaufort, South Carolina, to that national cemetery and buried those young men, reactivated their colors, and buried them with dignity and with honor. They had in service, as they lost their lives, they were just rolled up in a poncho and buried somewhere as they moved on. The ones that got into action warfare were, when their bodies were recovered, they were buried in a mass grave, which is what they wanted to do to these 19 young folk that had lost their lives. They were buried in a mass grave, and their commander, who was white, was thrown in there with them. And it was a thing of indignation that they did in terms of burying them rather than giving them the honor that they deserved and they needed. And that kind of valiant sacrifice is still not fully recognized or appreciated even today by many. I can't say not everybody, because some do know. And I know that true warriors can drop the isms and embrace each other in genuine recognition. This nation has not begun to fully appreciate the sacrifice that Black folks have made for this nation. And particularly when you add the military experience and what it's done to their everyday opportunity at living. World War II, the German war prisoners of war had better accommodations, and they were cared for better than the soldiers that served in the military. I've talked to World War II veterans, and Deacon Kirlock was one of them, that could tell you about the prisoners of war being kept at Westover. And when the war ended and they were set free, some of them were given the opportunity to come back or to be here in this country, and they could buy a house with more dignity and quicker than a Black man that served in the military and had supposedly all the guarantees of the benefit of being a soldier. They had a tougher time with those caveats supposedly in place, getting a home to raise their families in.
You're also reminding me that not that as Black folks we don't exist amongst white people, but the first connections, intimate connections with white folks were the white men you served with, Uncle Louis, right, Mr. Glick, where we were in one another's homes.
Right.
And so that experience, as you just talked about, in terms of just like the folks who were, whether true warriors or like built those relationships, important because it wasn't just existing amongst white folks. These were folks that, yes, through an experience that you all had, yes, our families were connected and still connected. I mean, Uncle Louis still is Uncle Louis. And I remember having this memory of like, how's this white man my uncle? Like it didn't make sense. And trying to reconcile, I was like, everybody else is Black. Like, I don't really. So, yeah, reminded me of that. But I'm going to shift gears in a minute.
I was just going to say, you prompted a thought on that. And what came out of that was that when we were in basic training, Louis and I, after our first leave to come home, after a while being in basic, finishing up basic right at Christmas time, I was getting ready to come home. And Louis' family had sent a plane ticket for him. And the best my mother could do was get a train ticket to ride on the train to come home. And the train stopped at every station on the way home. And I was based in Texas and trying to go to Massachusetts. So I mean, we laugh about it, but I can remember them telling the jokes about, well, we'll be back home and getting ready to go. And then Donald will just be getting home on the train. I mean, it hurt and it was funny.
Yeah.
It was funny in some ways, we made fun of it, but it was a hurtful thing because I didn't have the means to get home on the plane that night. Flew us down there when they drafted us and put us in the
Right. And
military.
then you were.
Mom had to get us home on the leave. I made, as young recruits, we made maybe 11 cents an hour. So we didn't have much money coming in, and I sent most of mine back. I tried to get them to give my mother allotment, to pay allotment. I put some in, they would put some in. I wasn't eligible for that because it wasn't my wife in the family. So I still sent my money home. So I went through most of the military time with almost none of my pay.
Yeah.
But the thing that I guess I wanted to point out in terms of talking about the humanity and people that were real was that somehow just before we were getting ready to get on when Louis was getting ready to go, a plane ticket came up for me to fly home with him at the same time. And it was presented, my mother had sent it, presented it to me through the mail or whatever, but it came from my mother. And I knew, where did she get the money for a plane ticket? She had to borrow this money. Where did it come from? And she never told me. And I never knew. I was just so proud that she loved me enough that she sent me a plane ticket so I could fly home with Louis rather than, take all. So I was able to come home with him and go back with him. His parents and my mother became dear friends during those visits. And I just learned within the last 6 months that Louis' father, his parents, paid for that
The
ticket.
last 6 months.
The last 6 months. He never told me. Wow. My mother never told me. And his dad was endeared to me. When I became a notary public, he used to come and have me do his papers that he had to do with his business and stuff. That, whenever he had some business that had to be notarized, he would make it a point to come and see me. And at the vet center, he helped me to get a vending machine. So we had refreshment in the vet center. So he always did things that were supportive of me. And Louis would always tell me, my dad told me he saw you today. Wow. And so those are conversations we still have today with over almost 60 years of friendship, if you will. But I never knew that.
Wow.
And now that was being real. Those were people that were being real. There were white folk that were good people, genuine, and Louis was one of those, Mr. Glick and his family. But yeah, it seemed to come under duress that people find love and opportunity to be good to one another. Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you held me?
No, I can't remember exactly the first time that I held you. And that's funny because I can remember the first time that I held Carter, and I have a picture.
My child,
but,
yes.
But my first memory was after you were delivered, and I came up because I didn't go in the room. Didn't want to see the pain and the struggle of that. And they said I was a fainter, so they would let me in there. So the first time that I saw you, you were in one of the little baby baskets, little plastic baskets they have like for the babies.
Yeah.
And they lay them, and you were wrapped up like in a little blanket that they have, and you were laying on your stomach, just laying there sleeping. I walked up and I came in the room, and there you were. And that image is etched in my memory. And I guess the flood of emotions that came with seeing you, my little baby girl. You were the youngest. We had a daughter and two, but there was just something special. I don't know whether it's in the struggle that we had as going through, life, just trying to make it, and then you being born, the success of that. But that's the image that I have, and just a sweeping emotion of seeing you there. I don't think I could pick you up then. They wouldn't let me pick you up. I do know they wouldn't let me pick you up then. That, and the next time I guess was when they brought you in. Mom was there, and they brought you in, and she was holding you, and you had a little bob in the head, But that's the moment that most profoundly sticks with me. The first time ever I saw your face, that was it. And you know, you're just a little bitty something, you know, maybe that long. And just a little, I used to say like a little daisy ham wrapped up tight, I guess to keep you warm. But that's when I first saw you. That was my first seeing you and, you know, beholding you and knowing that you were mine, ours, say mine, but ours. But you were just special. You were just special. Because during that old time, there was that struggle with me with the post-traumatic stress, with the back injuries that I had and being able to maintain consistent employment and get a decent paycheck to take care of our home and then you all the way that we needed to. So you were a blessing. You were the joy that came out of, you know, out of that. You're just a blessing to us.
So we call those, flashbulb memories, also core memories. So I want to have the opportunity before we end today just to share some of my core memories so that you have those to carry with you as well. My flashbulb core memories are just growing up and laying on your chest and feeling your whiskers. And your whiskers would always scratch me on the face. As a Black woman now, what comes to mind for me is just the protection that I felt, the safety and protection from such a young age. And even today, even with you being almost 80, that is so core to me that I'm like, if anybody messes with me, I know them, like my daddy and by extension, my brothers are coming. But to feel that as a Black woman in this world, I don't take it for granted. So I just remember that. I remember from a gender perspective, you taught me how to iron. Like the lessons of ironing, the lessons of hygiene that you taught all of us. But I remember you instructing us. It's like, no, you got to, you know, again, as a father, right? Because they say like a mother does that kind of, but for all of us, for my brothers and for myself, I just have these sort of memories. I remember being at the ironing board and you're like, no, you go shine in your shoes. The things that you say to me that I still carry, total level head, like these little sayings. Remember who you are and you represent the family. The hugs, yes, but the warmth and the safety and the comfort of laying on your chest and just feeling like your whiskers stands out to me. You're always being present. I saw you this morning when I passed by the room on your knees praying. So there's also for me the power, even when I've had my own moments with spirituality and Christianity and patriarchy, knowing that my parents and you in particular, like I call you and you're like, you're already prayed for. Like that has kept me through the struggles that I've gone through, wherever I was, right, in the world, trying to figure out life and get my education, knowing that I'm already prayed for. You holding my son, so having that memory of then me having a baby and then you being in the waiting room and like the picture of you holding him and the picture of you like being with him as a baby and seeing your relationship with him grow, I think is really powerful for me. But you've just been a constant, steady, powerful force of protection and peace, which for me as a woman has been instrumental in the decisions that I've made in relationships, how I walk into a room. It's that confidence. I'm your princess. And so it also taught me how other people need to treat me unapologetically. So like that blueprint translates in life, even though there was a time in my teenage years I thought you were, trying to punish me. But I get it now. You always used to say, you'll get it one day. And I get it now because it taught me discernment and where to go, who to be around, what to watch out for. It allowed me when I went to college to not end up with the same fate as some of the other young women that I went to school with. It allows me to proudly say I've never used like an illicit drug in my entire life. I was never enticed by alcohol or those things that I saw, my peers do because of those lessons. The core of my identity in terms of my Blackness comes from that household, the pride in that, while also the recognition, right? And the strategies to navigate the world. So I don't take that for granted either in that regard. So those, I just have my own in the ways that you do, like core memories throughout my life and the moments of pride. So I am curious, my last question as we end is, what do you want your grandson to know?
He's already become quite the mature young man for his age, and he's smart and sharp as he's just sharp. I just want him to be the best that he can be. And he's already started to take on the kind of behaviors you've you all have worked hard, and I know that you've given him a solid base of tutelage, if you will, and you're a constant example for him that will be etched in his memory and that will launch him off in the right direction. You know, my worry is that outside influences might come and try to take him off track. You know, because those things do have, you get attracted by those things that you've been told not to do or you shouldn't do. You got folks that you befriend or you look at and you see them doing it and it looks like it might be cool or okay, and you want to try that and you end up hitting your head or getting hurt doing that. That he would be smart enough and sharp enough to stop before he takes that turn. I know that if he does, he would be resilient enough to correct himself and to move in the right direction. You just want him to total level head, as we would say. He's got that curious, quick mind, and he's got good role models to look at to set a pattern, set a precedent for him to move in. So when you have those kind of things early on, you don't stray from, apple don't fall far from the tree. And stuff that ain't right will feel wrong real quick for him.
Yeah.
And then he'll get back right. What worries me is the world and the decency, the lack of decency of the world and the moralities and the principles of the world, how they went so far astray until, you know, they'll be standing up like in the ruins of a war, if you will, and not knowing which is the best way to turn or to go, but confident that the life lessons, the things that he's observed and learned will guide him. He'll look up and he'll know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So that'll give him some direction in terms of whether home is south or north or whichever direction. He's sharp enough to pick up on those little things, natural things that will be the feelers that will guide him along. The values that he's experiencing are strong enough where I'm confident that that will happen for him. I just want him to grow up and experience life in the way that he desires. You're giving him the opportunity to be a child in a rich kind of a way. He's got good experiences as a child in a safe, clean environment. I didn't have those luxuries. I've lived in a house where they turned the lights out because we didn't have enough to pay the light bill.
Yeah.
And had to scuffle around and find a way to get the lights turned back on before night came. You know, that kind of thing. I've been there. We've had to make scraps to eat, to make a meal out of what was left in the fridge. We've had to commodities, the USDA surplus stuff.
Yeah.
We've had to be recipients of that, receive that gladly. Get on the bus to go get it and come back. He's been protected from that. He's been blessed to not to have to experience those kinds of things.
Directly connected to you. That's the point.
Well, in some ways, but
in many ways, that's the point of the conversation.
You've given me those insights, and I'm truly honored. I guess I want to say blessed. I know I'm blessed. I've known that for a long time, to have a wife that stood by me and helped raise beautiful children, strong children like you over the last 55 years.
Yes.
And knowing what she's had to deal with in terms of those ruminations from the war that vibrated me, even as I was trying to be a man and sometimes fell off. She would be that arm that I could grab onto and get back up and get back on track. She could be that person I could cry on her shoulder and still wake up the next morning and feel like a man. You know, those kinds of things. Was going somewhere, doing something stupid, she would be the sounding board to get me, you know.
Get you back together.
And those are blessings, and you know that's built the core of our values. I know for one have really honed in on and they've maximized the value of those things in terms of the helping things that you do. I've looked at my whole family. Our whole family are helpers in the simplest form. We're helpers.
Yes.
Nurses, helpers and healers. And I can look through that through the whole family. I see that, you know, my wife, it was in my mother, and then, you know, she would go and help sick folks and clean their houses and fix food and things were right for them. My wife does that in her own way in terms of providing soup and so on, making handmade soup and stuff for folks that are at home recovering or what have you, just seeing about them. Just seeing about them. If I talk about the war experience, the advocacy experience, all of you all used to help make the little flyers and hand them out for the parades and for the programs, information. Yes. You all help.
We're community people.
That. Yeah.
No, we were community people.
Help do that. I'm just truly blessed beyond measure to experience that in each of you, and particularly you, to see how exponentially you have passed on wisdom. And through the grace of God, yes, you've been prayed for, and you can write it down that I'm a praying father. Yes.
Well, thank you.
From day one. And I thank God that he embraced my family so that we know that, have the good sense to know that there is a God.
Well, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to have the conversation with you and for being open to the conversation, not knowing what I was going to ask. It is, I feel, important for connection, for healing, for legacy. And it is a gift. Carter will have this gift to be able to watch.
Well,
right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Love you too. We'll just keep on doing what you're blessed to be able to do.
I'm going to give you your flowers for real. These are your flowers.
Wow. Well, thank you. This is one of the first time I've received flowers.
What? I try to give Carter flowers all the time. As a boy,
well,
on purpose. For that reason.
Yeah. And I try to tell all of you that I love you. I want you to hear it from me, and that to be a memory that my dad told me that he loved me.
Yes.
That's important. I can't remember hearing that from my dad.
I do know that, and you do tell me that. Thank you.
Thank you.